What's up, folks? I'm Chris, your NFL writer here at Occupy Fantasy, here with a look at Week 15 of the NFL season here on DraftKings and FanDuel, the main slate here on Sunday. 12 games here on DraftKings, no more bye weeks for the rest of the season here. 13 over on FanDuel, where we have access to the Packers and Seahawks Sunday Night Football games. So, normal agenda of the show, go over my favorite play, which you see on the screen. I'll go over our favorite plays for DraftKings, and then I'll talk about how we can mix in some plays from Sunday Night Football over on FanDuel. Except this week, I do want to spend a little bit more time talking about FanDuel than I normally do because we have the Fan Championship contest over on FanDuel today, and I'm sure that a lot of you have won some tickets to the big contest over there. So don't worry, we haven't forgotten about you. We are going to cover that here today. First things first, however, Chuba Hubbard of the Carolina Panthers, the starting tailback for Carolina all year long. Fortunately, Jonathan Brooks made a brief appearance this season and will no longer be playing for the Panthers for the rest of the season after his unfortunate re-injury of his knee last week. We also have Raheem Blackshear in Carolina's backfield that is questionable to play in this weekend's game. Chuba Hubbard basically is not going to have any competition for anyone to even come in and spell him for a touch or two against Dallas this weekend. Also, the fact that he's playing Dallas this weekend is a really big factor here for why he's a great play. Dallas is the fourth worst rush defense in the NFL this season, and they're about league average defending running backs in the passing game. Talking about a running back here in Chuba that's going to have upwards of 80% of team carries here with a chance for like 3 to 4 plus targets. On top of that, it's really hard to argue with that volume, and the field isn't doing that at all. They're going to be playing him heavily. He's going to be about 30 to 40% owned on tournaments, but I absolutely do think you need to match the field here and start your lineups with Chuba Hubbard in all contest types this week. Now, I do like to look at the biggest favorites in betting markets to give us a little bit of insight into who else might be interesting to consider rostering this week. The Baltimore Ravens are favored by 15.5 points on the road against Tommy DeVito and the New York Giants. King Henry, $8,300. Going to be a great tournament play as a result. Has not had a touchdown in his last 2 games after dominating to begin the season here, so maybe the field has soured on him at his price tag here. Regardless of that, the Giants are about league average defending running backs this season, below average defending running backs in the passing game. That's more of Justice Hill's spot than Derrick Henry's, but if he does get a few targets like he did in their last game out against the Eagles before the bye week, maybe that's where he can do some damage this week instead. But I would expect Derrick Henry to be a good tournament play this week, not going to be someone we're considering in low-risk contests despite the mega spread here. The Washington Commanders are favored by 7.5 points on the road against the New Orleans Saints. Saints have lost Derek Carr for the season. Jake Haener is going to be starting for New Orleans at quarterback. Fortunately, it's not super clear how to attack the backfield here. Jaden Daniels is going to have rush attempts of his own. We think Brian Robinson is the best guy to consider rostering here, but when you look at the carries over the last few weeks where he has been available, Week 12 in particular was concerning against Dallas, where his usage really went down. But I do think he's your main guy here on early downs to focus on in high-risk contests against the Saints. But be aware of McNichols and Chris Rodriguez as guys that could potentially mix in here behind Brian Robinson. And last week against the Titans, Chris Rodriguez got a ton of work. So he would be probably the biggest threat to Brian Robinson's workload here with Austin Eckler out for the season at running back. So that's the Commanders, favored by 7.5 points. The Philadelphia Eagles, they are favored this week against the Pittsburgh Steelers by 6 points. And you already know the number 1 running back on the season, Saquon Barkley, is going to be pretty high on our list as a result. Pittsburgh has been pretty tough defending running backs this year in both traditional running down situations and in the passing game. So matchup-proof Saquon here, I get it, but is a more difficult one at home against the in-state rival Pittsburgh Steelers here. So Saquon, a good high-risk play. The Arizona Cardinals, favored by 6 points at home against the New England Patriots. James Conner is going to be one of your most popular running back plays on the slate, so I actually think he's a great low-risk play here in this matchup. Patriots 28th defending the rush this year, according to DVOA. 27th defending running backs in the passing game. Might sound like small stuff here, but Emari DeMercado is out for Arizona, so that means one less healthy running back behind Conner to spell him this week. It's probably going to be mostly Trey Benson behind him. So I would expect there to be a little bit of a higher floor here with James Conner's playing time against the Patriots rush defense here. So I think you want to play him in low-risk contests. Other plays that are going to be popular here. We have Chase Brown on the road against Tennessee Titans. He's basically getting all of the work in this backfield since the Zach Moss injury. and he's seeing a decent amount of targets in the passing game. He'll be popular against the Titans this week. Titans are a top 10 rush defense this year, so the best place for Brown to do damage will be in the passing game, and we've seen him do it as recently as last week against Dallas. We have Rico Dowdle from Dallas on the other side of that Panthers-Cowboys game on the road, facing the worst rush defense in the league. This is basically a coin flip game. It's been like Carolina -1 to pick them depending on where you look, and Dowdle has absolutely asserted himself as the bell cow here with 18-plus carries in each of Dallas's last 3 games. Not a ton amount of target volume in the passing game for Rico Dowdle, so we're looking for him primarily to produce on the ground, but this has been the easiest defense for running backs to do that against week in and week out. So we like Rico in low-risk contests this week at his very low price. We have a play for you FanDuel players from Sunday Night Football. Zach Charbonnet is just $6,700 on FanDuel, and he is going to start. Walker caught another doubtful tag here after not practicing all week, so that means he's basically 99.99999% out this Sunday, and we saw what Charbonnet did last week against the San Francisco 49ers. Made some big plays, definitely has an opportunity to do that once again here against Green Bay. Green Bay is slightly below average defending running backs in the passing game. I think we absolutely want to play Zach Charbonnet in this primetime game as a third running back in lineups this week, so probably want to include him in your flex spot over here on FanDuel. That is a rundown of how we are treating the running back position this week. I think that's really the core for low-risk contests. For high-risk contests, we surf on over to the Occupy model. You see sitting atop of the model for both DraftKings and FanDuel, Houston's Joe Mixon. Mixon has a really, really strong matchup here against the Miami Dolphins at home coming off of Houston's bye. Dolphins are below average defending running backs on the ground and slightly above average defending running backs in the passing game, but Mixon's one of the few true bell cow running backs in the NFL this year, aside from Kamara, Saquon, Derrick Henry, and we still get his salary a little bit lower than those other guys in a great matchup here where Houston is favored at home against the Dolphins. So I really like him for tournaments this week as well at the running back position. Back to low-risk contests now. I think all of the running backs I discussed before Mixon are in play. Can't use Charbonnet here on DraftKings in low risk, so I do think my preferred path right now is probably both sides of the Dallas and Carolina game and then using James Conner as a flex play just because that's in the 4 p.m. window. So if you DraftKings players in low-risk contests, this is where I think I would be. At the quarterback position, speaking of Arizona, we're expecting Kyler Murray to be the most popular play on the slate, despite 20-point outing, an efficient outing in a loss to the Seahawks last week. Salary didn't move. He's still just $6,000. So I think he's the ideal low-risk quarterback here. But the field is also attracted to the low price tag on Bryce Young with Carolina favorite at home. So you may see Bryce Young in some low-risk lineups this week. And then, believe it or not, Aaron Rodgers against Jacksonville has a chance to be decently popular this week as well. Jets are favored against the Jaguars, who are the worst pass defense in the NFL. That's why Rodgers is popping a little bit in some optimal lineups, and a couple of his teammates are popular low-risk plays at pass catcher. So more on that right now as we discuss the wide receiver position and the popular plays at wide receiver. Despite a 40% target share and an absolute domination at receiver for the Bengals over the last basically month plus of the season, Jamar Chase's teammate, T. Higgins, is going to be the most popular play on this slate at wide receiver. Higgins himself, 5+ targets in each of the last 5 games, coming off of basically his legitimate floor game against Dallas on Monday Night Football this past week. Has not deterred the field at all. We expect Higgins to be between 20 to 25% on both DraftKings and FanDuel. So if you're playing low-risk contests, you'd probably want to include T. Higgins in your lineup this week. Some of your other popular plays, just discussed this with Aaron Rodgers. Adams and Wilson are both going to be over like 10% owned on this slate, so I do think that they're phenomenal plays. Sticking with Arizona, we've got Kyler, we've got James Conner. We also have Marvin Harrison Jr. that's going to be fairly popular at a low price of $5,500, 6+ targets in each of the last 3 games. On the other side of that Jets and Jaguars game, Brian Thomas Jr., one of our underperforming wide receivers this week, 10+ targets each of the last 2 weeks, 7+ targets each of the last 3 weeks, just 1 touchdown in that sample, tons of air yards. So even though he has given you, a decent score the last few weeks, he has still underperformed his opportunity by a significant amount. When we look at his production, he's underperforming the last 3 weeks by over 20 PPR points. So there is room for some regression, maybe with some touchdown catches from Mac Jones here that make Brian Thomas Jr. a really good play. Field is all over it. He's going to be featured in low-risk lineups. Despite being questionable, Ladd McConkey is expected to be popular if he is active. He has been Justin Herbert's favorite target this season, so keep an eye on his status. Monitor that through Sunday morning. He's another low-risk play that the field is very, very interested in this week. Portland Sutton with the Denver Broncos at home against the Indianapolis Colts. He's going to be between like 15 and 20% owned in low-risk contests here on DraftKings. Got a bunch of guys in like the $5,000 to $6,000 range here that are going to be played on DraftKings, and that's probably why you see a cheap Bryce Young popping in some of the models for ownership for both tournaments and in low-risk contests this week. It's going to be hard to get all these guys in your lineups. On defense, you basically have to look at a punt to make it work. According to our model this week, the defense that the field is going to be most interested in using to do that is the Cleveland Browns against the Kansas City Chiefs. The most popular play is going to be Baltimore, who is the most expensive defense on both DraftKings and FanDuel this week as giant mega favorites. You got Arizona, that's another good option for low-risk contests. Carolina, specifically on FanDuel at just $3,400, will be popular this week. And Carolina is our number one ranked play in the model as a defense. So independent of ownership, we really like playing the Panthers defense against Cooper Rush and the Cowboys. Cooper Rush has been the lowest ranked quarterback out of all qualifying quarterbacks to start games this season. Yes, even worse than Deshaun Watson, if you can believe it. We have $2,900 for a tight end, and believe it or not, looking at the lineup the way that I have it right now, you can do this. And the field is interested in a couple of plays here. Primarily, Stone Smart with the Chargers. He'll be starting at tight end this week. Will Dissly is out for Los Angeles. Let's go look at the Los Angeles tight end room. So against Tampa Bay this week, Hayden Hurst on IR, Will Dissly out, Stone Smart going to start. Stone Smart's going to start. Didn't really intend for that to come out that way, but that works, I guess. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are the fourth worst defense defending tight ends in fantasy football this season. So that's kind of the risk everyone is willing to take here. There's not a pedigree here with Stone Smart in the NFL for us to really back, but he has the opportunity to play, and he played basically as many snaps as Dissly last week. So he's definitely next man up here for the Chargers, and the field is probably going to do this in low-risk contests. If you want to differentiate a little bit, we're not expecting David Njoku to play for Cleveland. He didn't practice all week. He's listed questionable. Jordan Akins will be the next man up there for the Cleveland Browns against the Chiefs. I think that's a very, very interesting play that is off the radar right now. I think what's probably a safer way to do this is to find some money at wide receiver. And if you don't play Cortland Sutton, we got Marvin Harrison Jr. at $5,500 that I talked about earlier. You could play him. Now you have $4,000 for tight end. There's a lot more options in here. Pat Freiermuth should be the number one option for the Steelers again with George Pickens out. I think Zach Ertz is a phenomenal play here against the Saints with Noah Brown out at wide receiver. He's probably going to be the number one, number two target once again here with a little bit of a higher floor now that Brown is unable to go. So I think this is probably the safer low-risk build here. Even though you have three Cardinals in here, probably play that in high risk too. This is going to be a very popular way to play the slate this week. So that's low risk this week. High risk contests. My favorite stacks this week, Philadelphia Eagles. They're very attractive, I think, this week in their matchup with Pittsburgh. I don't necessarily think you need to use a bring back here, but you can get Hurts, you can get A.J. Brown, and this is probably where that Stone Smart play comes in. A couple of receivers. That gets you home there. Massage a little bit to make it work. That's real expensive. So without A.J. Brown, you can still play Devontae Smith, and you got plenty of salary to use basically some of the plays I've already talked about here to fill that out. I love Houston and Miami this week. I mentioned, obviously, Joe Mixon as a high-risk play at running back, but at traditional pass catcher here, you can get Stroud at $6,200. Nico Collins is number one ranked wide receiver in our model this week. $4,600, get that cheap tight end in here, and you can finish up a lineup stacking the Texans this week. We know already that T. Higgins is going to be very, very popular at receiver. You can definitely stack Cincinnati here with Higgins. You probably would feel better about doing it with Chase, but I like Cincinnati's ceiling this week. Baltimore Ravens. This is probably my favorite play on this slate. Baltimore, the highest implied team total. Favored by 3 scores, so you don't need to use bringbacks. But we have Lamar Jackson. We have Zay Flowers as an underperforming wide receiver, number 1 ranked underperforming wide receiver in the Occupy model this week. And you do not really need to use anybody from the Giants side with this being a 15.5 point spread. Pretty easy to get a leading MVP candidate in here with his top receiving weapon. And you can play a cheap tight end. You could even play one of Lamar Jackson's tight ends and then a couple of receivers to finish off a lineup here. Of course, we also have Buffalo and Detroit, which is the highest total game on the slate at 54.5 points. Josh Allen is going to have his full complement of weapons. We're expecting Keon Coleman to be back at wide receiver. Dalton Kincaid is listed questionable, but he did get his practices in this week, and it seems like he's a lot more likely to play against Detroit than he has been the last couple of weeks. So Josh Allen's going to have his full complement of receivers, which means these are all good high-risk plays. I do think Mac Hollins sees the biggest dip in playing time at receiver. It'll be Shakir, Cooper, and Coleman. And then obviously Kincaid returning will basically eliminate any interest that we have in Dawson Knox. But you could play Allen, you could play Kincaid. On the Detroit side, despite the big difference in salary, Jameson Williams has actually seen more targets than Amon-Ra St. Brown over the last 3 weeks for the Lions. So I actually think he's a little bit of a better play as a bringback here for a potential Buffalo and Detroit stack. But obviously on the Detroit side of things, if you're playing Josh Allen, it probably would make sense to be interested in using either Gibbs or Montgomery as bringbacks. These guys are coin flips guys. They've basically been splitting all of the work in the backfield for the Lions all year long. Jahmyr Gibbs is probably the slightly better bet for a higher touch floor right now, the way that he's been used, than David Montgomery. But they both have a lot of upside at low ownership in the highest total game on the slate. So both phenomenal high-risk plays at the running back position. Underperforming wide receivers. We have a lot on our list this week. We have 13 of them, to be specific with you. Baltimore's Zay Flowers is the number 1 underperforming wide receiver in the Occupy model this week. So he's going to be one of our favorite high-risk plays. The number 2 underperforming wide receiver, Brian Thomas Jr., is going to be a popular play in low-risk contests. Should probably be played in high-risk contests as well because he's underperforming. Joshua Palmer with the Los Angeles Chargers, the number 3 underperforming wide receiver on this slate. Be a lot more interested in him if McConkey is unable to go, but even if he is able to go, we still get a modest price on Palmer, who is underperforming his opportunities on this slate. We saw QJ get into the end zone last week. Maybe it'll be Palmer's turn here against the Bucs. Carolina's Xavier Legette is also underperforming his recent opportunity in this offense. Things are going to be slightly more complicated this week with Jalen Coker returning to action for the Panthers. But Xavier Legette, the social media all-star this year with his phenomenal Southern accent, is going to be looking to eat some raccoon this weekend as an underperforming wide receiver, like him at his low cost. And then another play that's going to be popular in low-risk contests that we've already discussed in this video that has underperformed his opportunity despite getting a little bit more work in recent weeks and some coach speak. Marvin Harrison Jr. still underperforming his opportunities and underperforming his expected fantasy points over the last 3 games for Carolina by 28 fantasy points. So he's a great high-risk play. There are 13 total underperforming wide receivers on this slate. You're going to have to check out OccupyFantasy.com, navigate over to the model, check out our lineup builder to see all of them ranked appropriately. But these are the 5 best ones that we think you should be playing in your tournament lineups, in some of your low-risk lineups in DraftKings and FanDuel this week based off of the way ownership is shaking out. Now, talked about tournament lineups, talked about underperforming wide receivers, promised a little bit more talk about FanDuel for you playing in the Fan Championship this week. Already talked about Zach Charbonnet for Seattle at running back. I think he's going to be a phenomenal play at just $6,700. When we look at the tight end position, which is relatively all over the place if you're not playing Trey McBride, because Trey McBride basically has the highest workload at the position. I do think a play here on FanDuel that is not available to you on DraftKings at all worth considering is Tucker Kraft at just $5,200 for Green Bay at tight end. When we look at his recent work, he's been getting the second most targets in this offense for Green Bay from Jordan Love, and the Seahawks are 13th defending tight ends in fantasy this season. I like all of the stacks that I talked about for DraftKings lineups over here as well. There are 2 things that I think are worth considering here on FanDuel, though, that I didn't necessarily emphasize just yet. I really like just trying to get at this Ravens play. Lamar Jackson, Zay Flowers, our number one underperforming wide receiver. And then something else I noticed, Cleveland's down Cedric Tillman. Cleveland is not expected to have David Njoku. Your top two targets in this offense are going to be Jerry Jeudy and Elijah Moore. And for some reason, Elijah Moore is priced at just $4,700 here on FanDuel. So not an underperforming wide receiver per se, but when we look at increase in opportunities to touch the ball that is expected for Elijah Moore this week, just $4,700 here on FanDuel, $5,000 over on DraftKings. Undeniable that's well worth trying to get to make some other more expensive things fit. And you see, if you go with kind of my core here for a high-risk lineup, with some of our more popular plays, Chuba Hubbard at running back, Carolina Panthers' most popular defense. We got $8,100 to play a running back and another receiver in a high-risk lineup, doing a 2-0 stack with the most likely offense to put up the most points this week. I think that's probably the best way to attack the fan championship this week. If you have, a handful of tickets, I would love to get at least one Baltimore stack in there with some of these more popular plays. But with the amount of salary remaining, we can definitely get up to another tight end if you're not interested in that Tucker Kraft play. We have Trey McBride here that has the best role at the position. We can play Rico Dowdle, who I think is probably in play for low risk. We can get to James Conner and have $5,900 remaining for a final receiver if we do that. So there's a lot of different ways to get to the final lineup here on FanDuel, but I think there's a tremendous amount of upside here. That's going to do it for me, guys. I appreciate you checking out the videos. As always, good luck here in Week 15 of the NFL season, and I will be back next week to talk to you about Week 16.